Hi everyone, today I'm at the Bellevue Mine tour. Let's go explore.
The Bellevue Mine opened in 1903 and produced more than 13 million tons of coal before its closure in 1961. Most of the coal produced at Bellevue was sold to the Canadian Pacific Railway to power its fleet of steam locomotives. Today, the Bellevue Underground Mine tour takes visitors 1,000 feet into the mine and 150 feet below the surface. Let's go join the tour and learn a little bit about the inner workings of one of Canada's historic coal mines.
We went into that tipple there. That's where the coal was weighed and processed. Then it was eventually dumped into the much larger cart of the Canadian Pacific Railroad. That's CPR for short. They were our biggest buyer back in the day. They took up about 90% of our total sales. All that coal they bought from us, it went to fueling their trains, right? Because back in the day, those trains, they were steam-powered engines, right? In about 1959, the CPR, they decided they wanted to convert their trains from that steam-powered to diesel-powered, right? And so now they have diesel engines rather than that coal-powered, right? So they don't need our coal anymore. And so by 1961, they had completely stopped buying coal from us. There went 90% of our sales out the window. We really didn't have anyone to sell to anymore. And so because of that fact, we closed down in 1961. They had a special name for this. They called this a Welshman's Notch. And so they put this Welshman's Notch in the timber set, and every morning before the shift started, they'd actually try to pull that out. If you cannot pull it out, that means, well, the timber set is moved, it's shifted, that means it's not safe to enter the mine. Luckily, you guys watched me pull it out just fine, so we know it's safe, we're good to take our tour. We don't use those a whole lot anymore though, we use something a bit more advanced nowadays. If you guys come a little closer here, you'll see these up in the roof. These are called telltales. How they work is they basically have a very long cord attached to them that snakes all through the rock above us. And so if that rock does shift, it's going to yank up on that telltale there. It's going to make it so we can't see that green line, or possibly even yellow. And so if that's the case, we can only see that red line now. That means it's not safe to enter the mine. It's all moved. Something bad has happened, right? Luckily, we're staring right at that green line. We know green is for go. Nothing's moved, nothing's shifted. It's safe to take our tour. So where we're at right now, this is referred to as the first coal seam. This is the first coal these miners ever actually hit down here. So what they did at this first coal seam was they went about 1,000 feet straight that way. All that open area back there, that would have been coal at a point, and they mined it all out. Like I said,
that way?
they went straight that way. All that open area they mined out. 1,000 feet straight that way. They had to stop though. And the reason for them stopping was not because they ran out of coal to mine. It was actually because they had hit the property line of the next mine over. That was the Maple Leaf Mohawk mine. So even though there was more coal back there, they could not legally mine it because technically they were trespassing. And so what they did was they went to the exact opposite direction now. About 300 feet past that door there, further into their own property, until they had to stop mining again. This time though, it was because they had run out of coal to mine. They had dried up steam. And so they dug further into the mountain to try to find that second seam of coal. So like I said, we're at the second coal seam. This is in fact 2 of 2. This is the last seam we're going to see. But crazy enough, this entire tunnel that we're going to be taking our tour down today, it is inside of the second coal seam. That shows how massive it is. It's huge. But yeah, moving on from that, we're going to talk about some of that rock on the wall there. There's a few differences I'd like to point out. So that stuff up top there, you can see it's got a yellowy tint to it. That is limestone. That is a very, very hard rock. If you guys have driven through the Frank slide, all of that rubble in there, that is limestone as well. In fact, there are quite a few mountains on this eastern side of the Rockies here that are made out of that limestone, which is kind of neat. So it's pretty common. That stuff below it there, you can see it's kind of got that, it looks a little different there. That stuff that the miners call bone coal. You guys might know this shale, that's a more common term. As we look below, we'll see all that black rock. That is in fact coal. All this stuff back here, that's coal. Fancy that. You've seen coal in a coal mine? You would have done. Yeah, that's all coal back there. Moving on from that, we're going to talk about this big structure here. So this is what is referred to as a block stripping. It's not Jenga. Block stripping is used for supports. And so in very large open areas that have been mined out, it's almost like an atrium, right? It's big open areas, right? And so in that big open area, there's going to be a lot of steeling that needs to be supported because the walls are super far apart. As you can see, it does in fact go all the way up to the ceiling there. It's also chopped in. That makes it so that the ceiling stays stable, doesn't move at all, stops it from falling in, right? So where we're at right now, this is referred to as the MANWAY. What this was just a giant staircase that went all the way up to the surface. They built this as an alternate entrance for miners to get to work because, well, I'm sure you can imagine that portal area probably got pretty congested with coal carts constantly coming in and out, right? It got a little hard to get to work from there. So they built the MANWAY here as that alternate entrance. At the surface here, you would have had a few of your typical miners' amenities. That could have included a lamp house. That's where you got your lamp hat. Also a wash house. That's where you got showered off at. At the surface here, miners, they would have had a few of these little things. This is called a miner's check. Can you all see that number on there? I believe it says 226. So these were used for identifying the miners. Each miner had his own individual number. And so what a miner would do with one of his checks here, he basically made a trade with the lamp house. He gave the lamp house his miner's check, and then what he got in return was his lamp. And so that miner, he goes down to work with his lamp, and then what that guy at the lamp house did with the miner's check is he put it on a board, just like this. And so that was done so that, let's say my boss is looking for me. My boss is going to see my check on the board. That's how he's going to know I'm done work mining. Right. So where we're at right now, this is referred to as a chute. Before I actually get into the chute itself, I'd like to explain something to you guys. So in this mine, this was not the only tunnel. There were actually 9 of them. There were 9 levels down here. We're sitting on about level 6. This tunnel that we're on right now is referred to as the main haulage road. This was the only level of those 9 that actually had rails on it, which means it's the only one with coal carts, right? And so those guys working on those other levels, on those levels above us, they need to get their coal down here because, well, it's the only one with coal carts. So to get their coal from those upper levels down to here, they toss it down the chute. And be aiming for that little contraption right there, that's called an apron. And so, let's pretend this cage here, it's actually up. That coal, they're tossing it down, it's gathering, right? Once an empty coal cart arrived here, general laborers, not the miners themselves, they would actually drop that gate. All that coal is going to tumble into the empty coal cart. So that's how that works. Moving on to the coal cart itself now. These things are super heavy. This one right here weighs about 1 ton empty. They could hold up to 5 more tons of coal. And so that's 6 tons in total once this cart is filled up, right? That's a lot of weight. Crazy enough, horses actually pulled these carts. Usually Clydesdales or Shires, those big draft horses, right? They'd be pulling these carts, those strong ones. One horse would actually pull quite a few of them. I'm going to ask you guys, how many full 6-ton coal carts do you think one horse could pull at a time? 3? 3? What do you think? 3? 4? Any more guesses?
If it's flat,
It's
lots.
Sorry?
If it's flat, it's going to be there.
Yeah, so the floor here, just keep in mind, it's actually built on a 1-degree angle, so it is slowly declining actually. Yeah. Sorry, are there any more guesses?
10.
10. Okay, well, that's really close. It was about 6 to 8 at a time these horses could pull. And so how the miners, how they would mark their coal, right, how the company would know which miner to pay, was the miner would put another one of his miner's checks on his cart. This would have the same number as the one I showed you before. And so when your cart had made it to the tipple, it's got its check on it, right? they'd see the check on the card, and that's how they would know who to pay for all the coal right here, right? Pretty simple, not too easy to mess up, but some of you miners, they did. They exploited that system. See, what they started doing was that if a miner, he didn't feel like mining that day, he felt a little lazy, rather than actually mining coal, he would just stroll through the main haul truck here. And when it got real dark and a cart passed him, you know what he'd do? He'd just take that check off there and put his own on. He'd steal that payment. Now that's not okay. And so once the miners, they realized what was happening to them, they realized, hey, I'm not getting paid. What's going on here? So they figured they needed a secondary way to ensure that they actually got their payment. And so what they started doing was, rather than just putting their check on there, they'd actually crawl under the cart as well when it stopped, and then chalk up the bottom of it with their numbers as well. And so that once it went to the tipple, just in case the check had been switched, those guys, they'd also look under the cart. That's how they know who to really pay for. So that's how that works. How's it windy? Because yeah, there's another hole way down in the mine. We're not going to see it, but it's way back there. And so
like on the other side of that?
yeah, and so that hole, the air is coming from there, coming towards us, and then going on the portal. Yeah, so these are my friends. These are my friends Pete, and that's Tito in the back. And so these are what your typical miners would have looked like back in the day. As you can see, they're working in pairs, right? That's kind of weird, right? Typically, they would have been working alone. Only some of them actually worked in pairs. It was not company policy. The reason why some of them worked in these pairs was for safety reasons. You're probably wondering, if it's for safety reasons, why didn't everyone do it? Well, the reason why is because the company, they expected miners to be working alone in their individual races. And so if you're working with another guy or maybe more people in that one race, they would actually make less money, which is kind of crazy. So that's why not everyone worked as a pair. It was almost like safety at a cost, right? That's why not everyone did it. Tools in these mines, they had a few different ones that they used throughout the decades. In the early days, you would have seen these miners use one of these. When the mine first opened, they would have had this. I'm sure we all know what this is, right? Pickaxe, yeah. So the miners, they love using these because the pickaxes are fairly light. They're pretty easy to use. They like using them. They enjoy it. But yeah, at that time for the light source, they actually had something very similar to what we have on right now. Except they were not electric, they were actually called carbide lamps. They were still on their heads, but what they did was they actually produced a 6-inch flame that came from their forehead.
What?
So not the safest by our standards, but the miners, they enjoyed using them because, well, they don't have to hold on to their lamp, right where they're needed, right where they're looking, and it was also a fairly bright light as well. So they liked them. At that time, they also had another little tactic that they had that made work a bit more efficient. What they would do is they would actually let methane gas build up in their raises. What that methane did was it made the coal a lot softer and thus easier to mine, right? The thing about methane though is that there was a very dangerous downside to it. It's actually highly explosive, that gas. And so when we're chipping away at rocks with our pickaxe here, that's creating sparks, right? Let's not forget about our carbide lamp producing that flame, right? If one of these two things meets with that methane gas, it's going to go boom. It's going to cause an explosion, right? Now that's not safe at all, and so the company, they got rid of both of these. And so what they've brought in return is this thing. This is what they changed the mining tool to in the early 30s. This is called an air pick. It works very similar to a jackhammer. How you would have powered it is you would have hooked it up to something called a compressed air line. This is a big metal pipeline that went all through the mine, and it powered these air picks here. You connected it via a tube.
Is that what the mannequin up there is using?
Yeah, he's got an air pick, and you can see the hose attached to that would have connected to that big compressed air line that would have been over top of the screen. But yeah, so that's how you power them. That's how they work like a jackhammer. These things are also fairly heavy, so if I'm using this all day, right, I'm probably going to need both my hands, right? There's a problem with that though, and it came in the form of the lamp that these miners had to switch to from that car box, right? The lamp that they had switched to at the same time as this was something called a safety lamp. They carry it in their hand, just like this. And so if that's the case, the light is, you have to carry it, right? You need to use one of your hands, right? That causes a problem, right? If I need one hand for my light and two hands for my air pick, what do? I don't really have three hands, so I reach a dilemma. So what these miners did to hold onto their safety lamps there, was they put them in their teeth. They actually carry them around in their mouth as they work. Kind of gross, right? It was something that made those even more gross, was the fact that this works like a jackhammer, right? So when we're chipping away against rocks, that's vibrating, right? And our body's probably going along with it like this. And so if that thing's clanging around in our teeth, and they were actually fairly heavy lamps as well, they weighed about 4 pounds. So if that's smashing around in our teeth, some of these miners would actually get their teeth knocked out by their lamp. Kind of gross, kind of not the greatest.
Now, at this point in the tour, the guide casually informed us of the mine's resident ghosts. In fact, I found out later that the mine was known to be a little bit of a paranormal hotspot and had been featured in the ghost hunting television show The Other Side.
So now that I've told you that there's a ghost down here, we're going to do a little thing called lights out. So if you guys don't mind clicking on your lamp twice, that'll turn it out if we're comfortable with this. If you're comfortable, just click your lamp twice. That's it. So what these miners actually have to do in this darkness to know what they were mining, they would have to use touch. They would actually knock on the rocks on the walls in their raises. And if that rock that they hit gave any sort of way or crumble, that meant it was coal, because coal is a very, very weak rock, right? So they actually used touch to know what they were mining. Crazy enough, these miners, they actually had to conserve their fuel because they were only given a finite amount of it, right? And so if your lamp went out, you couldn't actually refuel it because these lamps, they were locked, crazy enough. The only guy with the key was my boss. My boss, he's probably not always with me. He's probably chilling at the portal or the tipple. That could have been a 4-hour walk away. Because keep in mind, back in the day, this mine had actually gone on, it actually would have gone on for another 5 kilometers past this fence here. And so it was big, and so your boss, he was far away. And so if your lamp were to go out, if you ran out of fuel, I can't do anything, really, I can't. And so the only thing I can do is just sit in my race and pray that someone comes and finds me, like my boss, and comes to relight my lamp. But in that time that I'm waiting there, praying that my boss finds me, I'm not getting paid, right? Because remember, paid per time. And so that was the worst case scenario right there. That does mark the end of our tour now. Feel free to turn your lights back on.
And remember to keep exploring. Until next time, it's time to exit through the gift shop.